Got it! I'm finally ready to film my beautiful... Well... Hello and welcome, Rae'chel here, and forget what I mentioned at the end of my water video. Today we go be making deserts. Deserts are vast landscapes that are way too open to be Dune's simple 3x3s. So we are scaling up to 6x6s and 6x12s. Start by cutting a length of foam that's 3 grid squares by more than 12 grid squares. Then mark your 12 grid squares, cut, measure, and cut. Glue 2 of these strips together using PVA and hot glue. And then glue some chipboard on the back for reinforcement. For anyone following the deep lore of measurements on this channel, I did cut these down to 7/16 of an inch to accommodate the 1/16 of an inch chipboard. Then we base coat with equal parts tan, mustard yellow, and white paint. No need for Mod Podge yet. It wasn't until after I painted and added rocks that I thought to do this, but if you want some divots or uneven ground, you can use a lighter to melt some of the foam. But you really hot to do this before you paint. Divots or not, we will use this as the base for 3 different styles of board: rocky desert, sandy desert, and our token transition boards. For our rocky desert, we start with glue spots and a sprinkling of very small rocks. Here, I'm using Woodland Scenic's Fine Buff Talus. As that's drying, we're gonna mix 1 part of our tan yellow white paint mix, 1 part matte Mod Podge, and 1 part water. I'm gonna call this mix our sand glue. For the sand itself, I've mixed unsanded tile grout with reptile sand because it's naturally quite fine, unlike regular sand, which is
coarse, rough and irritating.
Anyway, wear a respiratory mask while mixing and sprinkling this grout mix because the dust is very fine and breathing it in is desertifiable way that you may satisfy the lung disease gods. Coat the board section at a time with the sand glue and then sprinkle this evenly-ish over the board and just lightly toward the edges. Note that this step does get messy. Any grout mix that doesn't become wet from the sand glue underneath will need more sand glue dripped on top. There are different ways you can do this, and I chose the most tedious, with a tiny pipette. If you don't want to spend hours painfully pipetting, although I personally perceive plotting project pleasurable, you can put your sand glue into a spray bottle of some sort and spray away. To encourage seepage, you can also spray 99% isopropyl alcohol first, then the sand glue. I also like to add more small rocks after sprinkling the grout mixture. Do this before the sand glue though, the resun being for better adhesion. Depending on how thickly you put on the sand grout mix, you may have spots of white grout still visible on top once it dries. We'll address this when we get to the transition boards. Now, a lot of our steps for creating a more sandy desert are going to be similar, but very different visually. After base coating, we go straight to coating the board in sand glue, then sprinkling our sand grout mix, and soaking that with more sand glue. But for this part of the desert, I wanted that nice soft sand look, so I took out a hard sharp clay tool. Think like you're spreading icing on a cake, or buttering toast. Scrape along the edge to ensure that there isn't too much height buildup. Once it's all slicked over, we do this. We do it a lot. We do it at different angles. This will encourage little bumps that look like the sand has been disturbed, trotted through, walked over. Now please learn from my mistakes. This board was not wet enough and I thought I would like the stiffer peaks, but I did not. If your peaks look more like arid, it's because your grout mix is too dry. So before it dries, you can pipette or spray more sand glue over top and spread again. But no matter, since this board had already dried, I just sanded down the stiff peaks. You'll also notice that the board dries lighter in areas where the grout is thicker. Worry not, the solution is coming with our next step. are transition pieces, because the more you can use together, the more useful all your terrain pieces will be. For this board, choose which sides you want to be rocky desert and which sides you want to be sandy desert. I'm choosing one long side and one short side each. Start with gluing the rocks just like with the rocky desert. The difference is that you will sprinkle fewer rocks toward the center. Let dry, then coat the whole thing in sand glue and sprinkle with sand grout mix. Remember which sides you decided were your rocky desert and sprinkle more rocks on top before coating in more sand glue. Now here's where it gets a little tricky with the texturing. Start with the sandy desert edges and then slick it down as far as you would like to be completely sand. Dab like how we did before, and then using just the tip of your tool, dab in toward the rocky desert, gradually fading out. I think this causes the sand particulates to shift toward the bottom and the grout to be at the top, so the more you poke into a spot, the less gravelly it'll look. Once dry, you'll see that your efforts to blend the color has been
not so good.
However, the texture gradient will be
Nice.
So what do we do now? Why, blend the colors, of course. For this, I made a rocky sand wash and a sandy sand wash. Apply the washes heavily on both sides in order to give you plenty of liquid to wet blend as they come together. After doing this a few times, you should have a triumphant color gradient. Speaking of dry, I cut out the let dry step from all of the following. This desert terrain is not an overnight project. Also, using the rocky sand wash and the sandy sand wash is how I got consistent colors on the rocky desert and sandy desert boards. I did about 5 washes per board to get everything just right, but you could experiment with straight painting or airbrushing to get your boards consistent. Just make sure your paint isn't too thick to avoid losing any texture. Then it's done. What? Oh yeah, if you're somebody who would like to support my channel, I have a Patreon where you can do just that. Right. Also, these deserts double as drag gravel road if you use them with my wilderness and coast tiles, links in the description. And if the gaps between the desert tile below and the wilderness tiles above bother you, then you can pour some medium-sized rocks to hide it, and then you can just scoop it back into the container when you're done. Look out for desert scatter terrain next.